do this magical thing with my computer. Good morning, my name is Mahan. I grew up in this community, and I grew up in a community who made sure I knew that I was unconditionally loved, including this one, and my family. At the dinner table, my parents would ask, to my amusement and to my brother's chagrin, if we had any crushes, any boys or any girls we were interested in. Another time, we were in the car with my mom, who was dropping us off to school on her way to work. At a stoplight, somehow we started talking about my mother's love. I don't really remember, but we started asking her, well, what if we did this? Would you still love us? And she told my brother and I that no matter what we did, she would still love us. So we asked, even if we murdered someone? And she said, yes. Then we asked, even if we murdered the entire population of the planet? And she said, maybe we were five or seven. And she said, yes, she would still love us, even if we murdered the entire population of the planet, which is very dramatic, and I really remember it because of how much it impacted me. It was very vivid. It's a very vivid memory for me, and it also comforted me. This UU congregation also taught me to oppose the death penalty and other harsh punishments for people who've done harmful things, because everyone, no matter what harm they've caused, deserves respect, dignity, and life. And of course, through OWL, which I also grew up experiencing our whole lives, if there's any new people here, that various gender expressions, sexual orientations, and family structures are natural and normal. So to recap, my family and community provided a base of love that allowed me, I think, to help grow into an adult. And I know that I'm worthy of love and care, and that I have the support of my family and community no matter what mistakes I make. But it still hasn't been easy. The first semester of college, I broke out into hives due to stress at the adjustment. I've always struggled with really intense anxiety throughout my life. If you have also experienced anxiety, you know what it's like to doubt yourself or to tell stories about why other people are doing things without really taking the time to understand why they might be doing things. Projection, I think it's called. Sometimes my loved ones and I even joke that with all this love, which I think is rare to grow up in a community that loves someone so unconditionally, I still struggle with confidence, principle disagreement, and more. It's a battle to feel sure in who I am, what I want to do, who I want to surround myself with. In addition to the love that I grew up with, I think a big bomb for me is the bomb of time. Life is dynamic, life unfolds over time. Nothing is sure or constant in any moment. This is a lesson I learned in part through coming out as transgender. In the process of better understanding myself as a trans person, I thought silently without telling anybody about it for 4 or 5 months. What even is gender? I think it's a huge question. I did research, I read books, I listened to other people, my friends. I was nervous about making a mistake and regretting it forever, which is something that's often talked about in mainstream media about trans people. But self-discovery is not a one-time moment. I slowly trusted myself in the feelings that I had in those moments to start sharing slowly with people I trusted. I shared with who I was with friends, I experimented with gender expression. I started using they/them pronouns in class and in new surroundings, feeling a thrill of calm when people got it right. I struggled through conversations with my family to make sure that they understood as best as they could where I was coming from. And I thought about a different name for over a year. My best friend and I sat down and researched gender-neutral Iranian names. Ehsan was a favorite. I really liked it, but it carries a burden. It means perfection, and it's also one of the names of God. So the name I ended up choosing, Mahan, which is my name now, it means of the moon. Mah means moon. Mahan, the ending at the end, means of the moon. The moon is constantly moving, constantly changing phases, but always present in the sky, weighty in the sky. And it reminds me to stay grounded in a constantly changing world. We see the moon in the night, and night is what my birth name means, Layla. It feels like a beautiful nest, kind of who I am. So it wasn't just one dramatic moment of coming out, but the collective series of moments in my life that make up this particular story. The one other lesson I want to talk about that I think is kind of already obvious in this story, for me that rivals time, is the lesson of community. I have a big problem with the narrative that me as an individual, or any of us as an individual, once we discover our true selves and unlock our inner power and potential, can overcome any barrier in society. This narrative encourages us to just think about ourselves all the time. And not only that, I think it's wrong. Just as there's no moment in time that passes without change and another moment immediately coming, no individual is distinct from the people and the world that we live in. Even though I'm standing here in my body and you're all standing there in your bodies, we're all in this room together, we're all experiencing this experience together. And that's some way that we're all connected beyond the individual. But yeah, the idea that we can achieve whatever we want if we just work hard enough, be true enough to ourselves, be strategic enough, is one that I think keeps us confused. We live in a world that is very difficult for the majority of people to even survive. It's built into capitalism that a small group of people control almost everything and do so on the backs of the majority of people. And I think to counter this system and to lean into what I believe all of us know is true growing up in families and communities is that nothing worth doing is done alone. It is the trust, spaciousness, care, and love that people around me provided me, not just that I provided myself, that was and it continues to be necessary to becoming my true self. I want to end with the anecdote or kind of folktale that I really like, and hope people think about it afterwards too. But it goes like this. A frog growing up in a well looks up and says, "The sky is no bigger than the mouth of the well that I see above me. I am the only frog in the world. There's no other frogs in the well." And there weren't any other frogs in the well. I think this was me sometimes when I just thought, I just need to figure it out. I just have to do it on my own. I need to just figure out a way to climb out of the well on my own. But really, just like a part of the sky looks like the size of the mouth of the well, and the actual sky is much larger, I think that reality and who we are all together is much larger than what we might experience as an individual. And I think that I would like to also, this isn't part of the folktale, but I think that if all of the frogs get together and maybe scheme and say, okay, let's put some water in the well so the little frog can float to the top, or let's like make a makeshift rope out of sheets and pull the frog out, then we can all see the sky together. So I'm excited for the world where everybody's needs are met and we are all free frogs basking in the sun together. In that world, we will all have the space, time, love, support, and resources to experiment and discover who we truly are. And that's the end, and I'm very grateful for all the UU people who witnessed me grow up, and it's very special and an honor to be back here and be part of this love service. Thank you.
I hope y'all can hear me okay. I have no way to know for sure. If I've learned one thing about being true to oneself, it's that it's an iterative, ongoing process. It's not a single endpoint that once you achieve it, you're now true to yourself forever. For those of you who may not know me, my name is Zach Apony-Moriarty, and I've been coming to this congregation around holidays and special occasions for a few years now. And in that time, since my connection to this community is one by association, I often get asked about who I am and what I do on very fundamental levels. And I found that since my answers change so frequently, it's become a sort of benchmark for who I am recently, a way to check in. Who am I these days? How do I explain myself? But before I was even coming here, I had a similar sort of ongoing reckoning that hit a little closer to home. I am non-binary. I use they, them pronouns. And it took me some time to figure that out. As I was completing my undergraduate education, I came to the dawning realization that the gender I was assigned at birth just wasn't quite the right fit. The interior part of that evolution is likely what you've heard from other trans people, either in your life, in art, through the news. And I could do a whole other speech about the need for everyone to do that internal consideration of everything about themselves. Gender, sexuality, monogamy versus polyamory, the type of work you want to do, what type of art you want to consume, etc., etc., etc. I could do that speech, but I think it's just as important to realize that the external work of creating self, of finding validation from the world around you, matters just as much. that who you are is something you do as much as you be. This is the story of how I needed to come out to my parents 3 times before they really understood my gender. The first time, and I remember this real well, many queer people do because of how freaking scary it can be to come out, no matter how accepting your parents may be. It was just a little burrito place in Amherst, Massachusetts, near my school. We were chowing down, and I did my best to explain my fledgling thoughts of not feeling quite right about my gender. The thesis, can you tell I'm still an academic, was the simple statement, I'm Zach and I like people, as a kind of summary of my gender and sexuality. My parents grasped the second part just fine. Sure, like or love whoever you want, they said. But as I try to express my discomfort with masculinity, with being called son and young man, it didn't quite permeate. And you know what? I'll take this L. I explained myself from a place of negatives, of lack. I am not a man. But without a good alternative, they were left with more of a Zach is figuring things out kind of vibe than anything else, which was a bit true at the time. So the second time was during my college graduation. I decided as part of my exploration that I'd get my nails done and wear makeup and glitter for the day. Small even for some cis folks, I know, but it was big for me. I ended up getting a lot of compliments actually, but it left my parents and some members of my extended family a little confused. They knew I went to this hippy dippy school, but this is the first time they had encountered me doing anything like this. So I explained it again. I came out to my parents a second time, to my aunt, uncle, and grandmother the first time. This time I gave them pronouns to use, they, them, and some language they could go Google, non-binary or genderqueer. I had done the internal work of finding language and clarity. This is who I am. Myself is this. Everyone but my grandmother seemed to sort of just nod along and do the kind, we just want you to be happy, nice liberal sort of thing. But hey, success. I had done it, right? My parents and I spoke on the phone occasionally over the next few months and seemed somewhat receptive to being corrected when they misspoke, but they never got it right the first time. They do the thing I notice a lot of people do, which is just use my name a lot because they've decided that that's less awkward than using they, them pronouns. But hey, we all need time to adjust, you know, I get it. Then I come back to the family for the winter holidays, and it's clear that the Googling I'd hoped they do did not occur. I felt like we were back at square one. I was being asked why I felt the need to correct people when they called me he because it broke the flow of conversation, like that was more important than my pain. I remember vividly my dad, in an honest effort, was looking for replacement words for son that wasn't just child. He's convinced that it makes me sound like I'm still a minor, whatever. And one thing he tried, and I'm not joking, was fruit of my loins. Now, we can all agree that that is objectively a pretty funny thing to call someone, but then another relative said, why not just call him a fruit? And I'm sitting a room away, hearing them laugh and laugh over how silly I'm being for simply asking my family find new words and being called an insult for queer people at the same time. And it hurt. I spent most of that trip in isolation. On the car ride home was what I considered the third coming out, and this is where the final lesson came into focus. It's sometimes not enough to frame yourself who you are in terms of positive statements and to be clear in your language. It's crucial sometimes to clarify how a given facet of yourself matters. In a conversation filled with tears on the familiar roads of I-84 and I-90, I expressed that respecting who I am was not just a matter of semantics, it was human respect. That if they were unwilling to engage with who I am, it could put an end to our relationship. That if someone cannot recognize you for who you are, then being true to yourself means standing up for it. Now, this story does have a happy ending. After that third conversation, something shifted. With those 3 pieces in place, I saw the effort. It wasn't perfect at first, and it still isn't, but my parents especially have grown and become advocates in their own environments for inclusivity and respect. And they often cite me as a driver for that change. My dad and I actually play this game now. When he uses the wrong pronoun or term for me, if anyone calls him out before he corrects himself, he owes me $1. That little incentive brings some play and levity to something that can still be pretty painful, but as a result, he's gotten better. Should it have been that hard for me to have my sense of self recognized by my family? No, of course not. But through it, I came to understand that being true to yourself can be as much of a doing as it is a being. And as parts of myself continue to evolve, I now know how to express and stand up for it. Thank you.
my crib sheet. I'm Allison McKenney, and this was my response to the topic, "To thine own self be true." I thought back many, many years ago when I was in college, and I was at home for the summer and looking for a summer job. Now, my father had a coworker who was a part-time distributor for a company that got people to sell their soap products door to door. And my father thought this would be a great job for me. In fact, he was so enthusiastic that he even convinced me. So off I went, ringing doorbells in the neighborhood. And I even got a few people interested in buying the stuff. But I felt more and more uncomfortable with what I was doing. I started to feel like I was trying to convince them to buy something they didn't need, and I didn't really believe in anyway. I felt like I was a liar. I felt like I was exploiting people. Finally, I felt so much revulsion, I quit the door-to-door gig and drove taxi for the summer instead. Now, I'm sure there are people out there who can sell stuff door-to-door and even enjoy it. But I'm not one of them. It is not me. Okay, a few years ago, I was in one of these online comment threads, if you all are familiar with that, and I was trying to get across to someone what it was like for me to be living in the wrong gender. And so I used the door-to-door sales thing as an example about that just didn't work. Well, he was not convinced. He kept insisting that anybody could be a good door-to-door salesman if they would just try hard enough. Well, I suppose if I had to do it to survive, I could have. But I would have hated it. I would have spent a lot of time and most of my energy just trying not to think about how awful it felt. And I'd probably be asking myself if being alive was really worth it, if this is what I had to do to stay alive. But I think there are a lot of people who do live like that, living lives of misery, trying to be something that they aren't. And it's no wonder that they might be really awful to live with and that they might reach for drugs or alcohol. And they might not even know not even know that they're in pain or why, because that's all they've ever known. That's just what being alive feels like, right? The thing is, there's a lot of pressure to ignore your own sense of who you are and instead do and be and want what everyone tells you to do and be and want. You learn to ignore your own sense of self and instead be what other people tell you to do. You forget that you even have a self of your own. You're just supposed to be happy with the one they give you. And if you aren't happy with it, if you're miserable or you feel lost, well, you're doing it wrong, or you're just not trying hard enough, or maybe you're just mentally ill. I've had that one. Thinking back to when I was growing up, back in the days when everyone told me I was male. And everyone then had a definite idea of what boys were like, or supposed to be like. They were supposed to be rough and tough, really competitive, and loved being dirty and telling dirty jokes. And of course, hating anything that could be considered girly, like cooking or playing the piano. No, this is not a made-up example. And I just couldn't do it. I couldn't make myself do it. I couldn't even pretend to do it. And the adults and the other boys made my life miserable for it. So the adults would go around and say, lecture me and say, what's the matter with you? And go, if you would only just try. And the other boys, well, they just ostracized me and called me weirdo and queer and sometimes stole my lunch. I think that's what I understand as pressure to be what they expect you to be. But there's a corollary to thine own self be true, and that's that you should let other people be who they really are. I'm thinking of all these parents you hear about who have a preconceived idea of what their child is supposed to be. Like the father who expects his son to be a football star when the poor kid can't throw or catch, is much more interested in music and art. They say that they love their child, but they don't really love the child that's there in front of them. They love their fantasy of what the child is. And the real child in front of them, they kind of resent them because they aren't like the fantasy. I'm thinking about, I have a child who is on the autistic spectrum. And when they were diagnosed at age 4, all these experts came out of the woodwork to tell us that they should be given, what's the term? That's right, behavior modification therapy. Sort of like training a dog, so that they would seem more neurotypical. Instead of appreciating autistic people for who they are and looking at their strengths, they want to turn them into what they aren't. They're like the person who was arguing with me online. They believe that any autistic person could become neurotypical if they would just try hard enough. I guess the lesson of this is to respect what other people are for who they are, who they really are, and to respect who you yourself are for who you really are.